Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 161, and just a little catch up on what's been going on. In the last issue, we got thrown into a story where a barbarian named Tark and a halfling named Boz came into our world from another dimension, and they were talking about something's taken over their dimension and it's going to come to Earth and try to take over as well. So they were in New York looking for a man named James Rook, who apparently at one time when he was younger had actually gone into this other dimension and helped protect that realm against some wizards who have now completely conquered everything in that dimension and are now going to try to conquer ours. So they have come to get Jim Rook. They find him, but he is older. Actually, only one of them finds him. Boz finds him because the barbarian actually gets killed by a bus the moment that he comes out into the street because he doesn't know what it is. So he got hit by it and he died. So the only person looking for James Rook was Boz, and Boz did find him, but Jim Rook didn't remember anything. He was an older man now. He did have the sword that is some mystical fire sword that's supposed to defeat the warlocks or at least make them fearful of him. But like I said, he's since forgot this whole journey he had when he was younger. So this sword was just sitting tucked away inside of a cabinet in his house until Boz pulls it out. And once Boz begins to talk about this other dimension that he was in, Jim Rook all of a sudden gets all of his memories back. And the sword itself does eventually burst into flames like it's supposed to. So with all that figured out, Boz takes Jim Rook back to the Dimensional Gateway, which is inside of a store called Oblivion Inc. And that's where we left off with them. And then with Swamp Thing, he was just sitting peacefully in the swamp most of the time. And he was thinking about something that was inside of a box he was looking at. And we didn't know what it was, the whole issue. But while he was sitting and thinking, Killer Croc from Batman was around the swamps for some reason. And he was trying to look into the box as well. And Swamp Thing didn't like that. So we got to see Swamp Thing's water powers for the first time as he built a bunch of constructs out of water that looked like himself, and then they all beat the crap out of Killer Croc. And then at the end of that, after Killer Croc was defeated, we saw what was inside that box, and it was a button from one of Abby's jackets. And as that was revealed, Swamp Thing heard a voice behind him, and when he turned around, he saw Abby Arcane, his ex-wife and lover, standing behind him, and she asked him to not say anything or ask her any questions, and she just gives him a hug and they begin to kiss. And that was where we left off in the last issue. So first things first, with issue 161, we got the cover, and this is a very different looking cover. It's completely black and white, so it's just ink on paper. And we see Swamp Thing and Abby in the swamp, and Swamp Thing is looking like he's running towards us, and it looks like his jaw is coming off. So it seems like something really bad is happening to him. And then behind Swamp Thing, we see Abby Arcane looking up at him, kind of scared, as she sits on the ground. And we also see on the cover that this is written by Mark Miller with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMolder. And as we turn to the first page, we get 6 panels where we start all the way in space looking at the Earth, and then we slowly zoom in each panel until we reach the Oblivion Inc. store where Jim Rook and Boz left in the last issue. And over these panels, the narration says, "Pushed beyond its limits, and the fabric of the world begins to tear, and Broiken the Druid is the first to come through. His appearance is impossible to describe, a patchwork of colors not yet discovered, both beautiful and repugnant at once. He is the harbinger of the coming apocalypse, the herald sent out to prepare for the arrival of the others. Just a glimpse of him is enough to drive you insane. The continent of Mira has been taken. All that stands between this world and the warlocks is an old man with a flaming sword and his half-wit companion. Sheer arithmetic dictates that it's only a matter of time before they fall. The druid's instructions are simple. Locate the most powerful creature on the face of the planet and assume control of its mind. From here, he can subdue this world and all of its metahumans. He can bring it to its knees. And so, he begins his journey south." Then we turn the page and we get a full-page splash of Broiken the Druid, who looks exactly like you'd think. He has a staff, he has kind of old and gnarled fingers and long hair that's gray, but he's covered completely from head to toe in a patchwork cloak. And he is in the middle of the street right next to the thanks for visiting sign of Huma, which is kind of interesting because the other guys, Boz and Tark and Jim Rook, are all in New York where the Oblivion Inc. store is. But I guess, like the text said, this wizard Broakin is here to find the most powerful person on the planet and mind control them. And that makes sense because obviously now Swamp Thing is the most powerful being on this planet. And we also see on this page that this issue is called Many Happy Returns. And as we turn to the next page, we start exactly where we left off with Swamp Thing looking at Abby. And I guess this is the moment before they kissed. And there's a little bit of a rewrite because at the end of the last issue, she just said, like, don't say anything, and then they kissed. But now we're starting before they kissed, and she says something different. She says, well, are you going to give me a kiss? Or are you going to stand there all day like a big dumb lettuce? I thought you'd be pleased to see me. And then Swamp Thing, who's still in shock as he sees her, says, Abby. And then they rush into each other's arms, and they kiss, and then Swamp Thing looks down at her as they break away, and he says, I don't know what to say. I never expected to see you again. And Abby looks up at him and says, shh, don't say anything. Just kiss me again. And then they kiss again. And then as they break away from that kiss, Abby kind of looks around the swamp and she says, well, I'd like to say I love what you've done with the place since I left, but frankly, it's hard to see any difference. And then she gives Swamp Thing's body a once over and she says, you're looking good anyway. These rocks and things on your body look terrific. Are they new? And Swamp Thing replies, yes. I mean, they're relatively new, I suppose. And Abby kind of smiles and says, you know, you sound kind of different too. Your voice sounds deeper, not at all the way you used to talk. And then she pauses because Swamp Thing's not really saying anything to her. And so she jokingly asks him, you do still talk, don't you, Alec? And I think Swamp Thing is still in shock because he does just kind of stand there for a second, and then he says to her, no one has called me Alec for such a long time. Nobody calls me anything these days. And then he gives her a once-over, and he says, your new hairstyle is very pretty. What made you change it? And then Abby kind of laughs and says, are you kidding? It's been driving me out of my mind for years. The old Bride of Frankenstein look was getting a little out of date. And she kind of catches herself because she thinks maybe she hurt his feelings with the Bride of Frankenstein comment. So she says, nothing personal. I mean, don't take that the wrong way or anything. It's just that so many changes have happened in my life recently. I moved to a new state and got a new job. I just wanted to make a fresh start, and a new haircut seemed kind of symbolic. And Swamp Thing asks, a new job? And Abby replies, didn't I say? I'm nursing again. Psychogeriatric. It's hard work, but the money's good. Mixing with people again is so weird. I must be the only person in the universe who'd never heard of Ricky Lake. And it seems like Swamp Thing is being kind of cautious towards her. Like he doesn't quite believe why she's here. And so he kind of turns away from her and he says, things have changed here too, Abby. Huma has become a ghost town. Normal people don't want to live near me anymore. They're afraid of what I might do to them. Tell me the truth. Why did you come back? And Abby answers, I came back because there's nobody and nothing in the world that I love more than you, Alec. Where else would you suggest I go? And then she tries to change the subject, and she runs off and says, come on, let's find our old house. Then we turn the page, and we cut to a policeman waking up in the morning, and he's getting out of bed, and he's kind of doing his daily routine to get ready for work. And over these panels, the narration says, Bret Harris yawns and waits for his body to wake up, blissfully unaware that he'll never open his eyes in this bed again. He shaves for the last time, thinking about his wife and his unborn son, and all their soon-to-be redundant plans for the future. Potential baby names drift in and out of his mind, but nothing really hits the mark. Beth Louise wants to name him after Patrick Swayze, but Bret won't allow it. He's pushing for Clint, after Dirty Harry, but she thinks the name looks vaguely obscene when the letters run together. Downstairs, he smokes his last nicotine breakfast and catches up on a couple of cheap cartoons on Nickelodeon. Briefly, he considers the name Lee, as in Lee Van Cleef, and, of course, Lee Majors, the $6 million bionic man. Nah, he decides, it's got to be Clint. Washed, dressed, and remaining hairs combed, He climbs into his police car and begins the last day of his life. We see Officer Harris drive to someone's house and knock on the door, and the narration says, coincidentally, Brett pays a visit to another dead man on his way to work. Casey the cop passed away some months ago, although technically his brain and body still function perfectly. He hasn't been to work since he broke up with his wife, and now he just sits spending his days watching TV in a semen-stained bathrobe. Once in a while, Brett drops by with some groceries and a morning newspaper, but Casey emphatically refuses to answer the door. So that is why Officer Brett Harris is here this morning. He is trying to drop off some groceries to Casey, and I think we've actually seen Casey before. I think he was the cop from the first prologue issue of River Run, whose wife and child had left him. So apparently he's been having a really hard time since then. And since Officer Harris doesn't get an answer at the door, he walks back out to his car, and as he does, he looks over the property, and the narration continues saying, the lawn hasn't been mowed in months. Flies buzz around the windows. Brett leaves the groceries on the doorstep, knowing Casey will pick them up in his own time. Then we get a panel from inside the house as Casey moves the blinds aside to look out the window, and he watches Officer Brett Harris drive away. And the narration says, the curtain twitches behind him as he gets back into his car, but Brett's already running through his list of boys' names for a son he'll never see. A darkness is gathering around Huma. Broakin the Druid will be here soon. Then we turn the page and we cut back to Swamp Thing and Abby, and they have traveled back to where their house used to be in the swamp. And of course, because it's made out of organic material that Swamp Thing hasn't been maintaining, it has definitely come into ruin. Pretty much the entire thing has fallen apart. All that's left is the tree structure underneath that was supporting it, and some beams and poles that were holding up different parts of the ceiling that have now sunken in and just kind of look like deflated tents. And as they look at it, Abby says, look at our beautiful house. There was nothing like it in the whole world. How depressing. And Swamp Thing turns to her and says, its fruits have soured. Now it smells like an old bottle of wine no one wants to drink. And Abby replies, you know, I bet you could build a better one with your new abilities. Just imagine what a room of flowers would look like in a castle made of water. But Swamp Thing doesn't seem like he's having any of this, and he just says to her, yes, Abby, just imagine. And then he asks, what happened to your new lover? Does he know that you are here with me? And Abby answers, Dawn and I split up 6 months ago. We tried our best, but they say you always end up leaving the one who breaks up something really special. I guess, deep down, we blame them because we can't blame ourselves. And then Swamp Thing asks, does this mean you no longer blame me? And Abby answers, you know I didn't mean those things I said in the desert. So much weird stuff was happening at that time in my life. I just needed to get away for a while and get my head together again. Putting a little perspective on things let me realize what I had here, you know? I don't understand the world outside anymore. Normal conversation bores me silly, and working 12 hours every day is definitely for the birds. I love you, Alec. I want to come home and be with you again. And then Swamp Thing just stares silently like he doesn't know what to say, and Abby asks questioningly, Alec? And then Swamp Thing turns from her, and we see that there is another Swamp Thing construct walking around, but instead of water like in the last issue, this one is made of stone. And Abby gets scared and hides behind Swamp Thing and says, Alec! And Swamp Thing calms her, saying, don't be afraid. This creature is just a helper I fashioned with sand and pebbles to help me with my chores around the swamp. He will not harm you. And then we get a panel of the rock construct looking out from behind a bush, and it seems like he is taking interest in Abby, which is interesting because if you remember from the Nancy Collins run, all of this started by Swamp Thing making a doppelganger of himself, and that doppelganger falling in love with Abby. So it definitely makes sense that Abby would be a little apprehensive to have more Swamp Thing constructs walking around. But I guess once he looks at her and sees that she's scared, the stone Swamp Thing walks away, and Swamp Thing says, he seldom speaks or shows any sign of emotion, but I find his presence here rather comforting when I'm feeling most alone. He is no substitute for friends, but I think you'll find He isn't altogether charmless. Off he goes, probably forgetting us already. And then Abby asks, so what about me? Where do I fit into all this? And as she says this, she's kind of like grabbing his arm and getting closer to him, but he doesn't seem to be responding physically, and he asks her, what do you mean? And she replies, oh, can I come back and live here too? And at her saying that, Swamp Thing just takes off walking, and he says, come with me. There is something I must show you. This place has changed, and so have I. Look at the suffering you risk if you stay here. You know what happened to the Cajun village. So as they walk, they eventually get to a clearing that used to be the Cajun village, but is now just a bunch of debris and broken buildings left behind after Swamp Thing destroyed everything. And as Abby looks at it, Swamp Thing says, I did this, Abby. I killed them all. And Abby replies, it wasn't your fault. The Parliament of Trees was behind this. You weren't responsible for your actions. You said so yourself. And then Swamp Thing replies, higher authorities influence me now. Further rituals lie ahead, and having you here is a risk I can never take, in case something like this happens again. And then he walks over to her and he puts his hands on her shoulders, and he looks at her in the eyes and says, I love you, Abby. I would die for you, but I refuse to let you die for me. The answer is no. I do not want you here. Then we turn the page and we cut to a woman getting ready for work. She's kind of a heavy-set middle-aged white woman. And as she puts on her lipstick, the narration says, Bess Urquhart's mom doesn't want to be left on her own while her daughter's at work, but she understands how much they need Bess's salary as a police receptionist. In fact, some days she'll do anything to stop Bess going into the station. So the mother is in bed, and Bess has left her breakfast on a bed tray, and the mother decides that she's going to flip out and throw the food in the air so that Bess has to stop before she can leave. So as Bess is walking out the door saying that she will see her mom tonight, the plate flies up and eggs and bacon go all over her mom's face. And Bess turns and says, oh, Mom, what'd you go and do that for? You know I got no time to clean up this mess. Big Jim's going to be here any minute. And right as she says that, we cut to a panel of a police car waiting out front of her house, and the narration says, the police mechanic she's been spending too much time with pulls up outside in his big pickup truck and hits the horn twice, fixing his hair in the rearview mirror. In the panel where it pulls up, you can't really see the whole vehicle, so I guess I was wrong. It's a police truck, not a police car. Then we cut to the inside and we see that Bess is kissing her mom on the head, and her mom doesn't look fully cleaned off, but I guess she's cleaned up enough so that most of the food is off of her. And as Bess kisses her mom on the head, she says, I'll clean those stains up tonight, Mama. I promise. And the narration says, Bess kisses her mom goodbye for the last time. Then we turn the page and we cut to another house where someone else is getting ready in the morning. We see outside of this house, there's a work van, and the narration on this panel says, on the other side of town, it's time for phone engineer Jack Plastino to get out of his box and dress for work. On Friday night, he broke the house rule and talked about the telecommunications business over supper, leaving his wife with no choice but to administer the strictest punishment. So this seems like a pretty odd house. I guess him and his wife are in some sort of dominatrix or BDSM relationship, because we see Jack's wife going down the stairs to the basement and approaching a wooden box with holes in it. And as she does this, the narration says, with no respect for her moral authority, he suggested they put an extension into the bathroom. He knew 2 days in the box would be his penance. The box has 3 air holes in its sides and is no bigger than a large television set. And as the wife opens the lid, she says, does it realize it had better get dressed and cleaned for work if it wants to keep its little job? And then we see a naked Jack inside of the box say, I'm sorry, mistress. You have my word. I won't be so bold again. Then we see Jack standing up and getting out of the box, and the narration says, for the last time in his miserable life, Jack Plastino has the questionable pleasure of cowering before his wife. So it seems like we're getting to know a bunch of different people that work in or around the police station, because as the narration has told us, this is their last morning alive, so something very bad is going to happen there. Then we turn the page and we cut back to Swamp Thing and Abby, and we see Abby is crying now, sitting alone by herself, and it seems like Swamp Thing is giving her a little space, and he's asking her, "Are you okay?" And she replies, "You mean apart from feeling like a total idiot? Yeah, I'm fine. I thought this was going to be so easy. I figured all I had to do was snap my fingers and you'd take me back without a moment's hesitation. A refusal never seemed like an option. It just never entered my head because... And then Swamp Thing cuts in, "Because I look so grotesque. Is that what you're trying to say, Abby?" And Abby replies, "Jesus, yes. Maybe that is what I'm trying to say. Oh, Alec, I'm sorry. This is all working out so wrong. I should have never come back. I'm just making things worse." And then Swamp Thing comes over to her and he kneels down and he looks her in the eyes and says, "Say whatever you please. Vanity and pride mean little to me now. My emotions grow more abstract every day, no matter how hard I fight it. This erosion of my humanity has provoked something I have seldom experienced in recent years. I believe in a very distant way. I'm scared, Abby." Then Abby asks him, "Can I ask you a question? Do you ever think about Tefe?" And Swamp Thing replies, "Of course. I often think of our daughter. A blade of grass told me she was studying in Patagonia. The Parliament of the Earth is training her for some unknown purpose." And Abby says, "It's so weird, isn't it? Ordinary parents would freak out if their kid was home late from school, and we're sitting here discussing our 5-year-old's elemental progress in South America. By the way, don't you mean the Parliament of Trees?" And Swamp Thing answers, "The divorce between root and rock is over. Now they represent the earth element as a whole. This combined parliament grants me powers over plants and minerals. These higher forces I described have shown me other, older intelligences. Most recently, I encountered the Parliament of Waves, and in passing the ritual they devised for me, I was blessed with the elemental water abilities I described. Half this world is mine now. I have been shown realms beyond even the green, and I sense other fantastic abilities will soon be within my reach." And I guess because Swamp Thing didn't really continue the conversation about Tefe and started talking about himself, Abby seems kind of angry and she says, "Yeah, well, that's really great. I hope you and your new abilities are very happy together." And then there's like an awkward pause between them as they just stare at each other. And then Abby decides to break the silence by standing up and going over to Swamp Thing and looking at his chest because there are some tubers that have grown on it. And she looks at them and says, "Alec, do you mind if I..." And Swamp Thing replies, "No, please, take one. I would like that very much." So she grabs one of the tubers from his chest and she begins to eat it. And as she does, she says, "You know what I meant to say? I had a dream about Uncle Anton recently. You were in it too as a scarecrow or something. And oh wow, Alec, look at your face. It's beautiful." And with that, immediately the drugs begin to kick in and all this psychedelic, imagery starts to come about. And Swamp Thing basically turns into a bunch of bright colors. And Swamp Thing takes her hand and kind of steadies her. And she says, "Oh, geez, I'd forgotten how great this could be." Then we turn the page and we cut to the police station where everybody we've met this morning that was getting ready for work are all meeting at the same time at the police station. And in the first panel, we see 2 police officers that we don't know sitting at a table in the back, and they're watching the receptionist, Bess, talk to the telephone repairman named Jack. And the narration says, "At the police station, the telephones aren't working again. One by one, the characters take their places and recite their last lines." And we see Bess say to the telephone repairman, "Incoming calls are no problem, Mr. Plastino, but we still got no dial tone. Must be the 3rd time this month they've given up on us." Then we cut to one of the officers in the back that was sitting at the desk, and he's kind of a stocky, middle-aged white man with a flat top and a mustache. And the narration says, Officer Sendak is so bored, he's taking a statement from Edward the Confessor, an unemployed blue-collar worker from Black River with a bad back and an overactive conscience. 2 or 3 times every week, he shows up and confesses to everything from unpaid parking tickets to the Atlanta child murders. Today, he says they should throw the book at him for the Jonestown massacre. Then we cut away from Officer Sendak to the first guy we saw this morning, Brett Harris, and we see him just sitting at his desk at the police station, and he's looking at a newspaper, and the narration says, "A million miles away, sitting just across the room, Officer Brett Harris is reading the showbiz column in his newspaper, still trying to find a name for his 6-month-old fetus, still unaware of his fate." Then we cut to the outside of the police station, and we see a shadowy figure in a robe approaching from down the street, and the narration continues. Outside in the daylight, something slouches towards them, chanting a prayer under its breath as it looks for a suitable place to hold its sacrifice. Broakin the Druid has made it to Huma. Then we get back to the police station, and we see the telephone repairman is looking at one of the wires coming out of the wall, and with him is the receptionist, Bess, and she's saying, "I heard you were a naughty boy over the weekend." And Jack is kind of taken aback by this, and he says, "What? Who told you that?" Because, of course, he was the punished guy that was in the box, so he doesn't really want anybody to know that. And then Beth replies, "Your wife said you went off on a fishing trip and didn't come back till this morning." And a very relieved Jack says, "Oh, right. Typical, huh?" Then we cut back to Brett Harris at his desk, and we see a woman approaching it from behind, and she says, "Say, could you spare a minute to talk to the mother of your child? Or are you too busy drinking coffee and protecting the innocent?" And Brett looks over his newspaper and sees his wife standing there, and very surprised, he says, "Jesus, Beth Louise, what the hell are you doing here?" And she smiles at him and says, "Charming way to say hello, Brett Harris. And since you asked, I just dropped by to let you know I thought of the perfect name." Then we cut to the outside of the building, and we see Broakin the Druid raises his hands, and the narration says, "A gesture of his hand, and it begins." Then all of a sudden, inside of the police station, all the lights go out, and the narration says, 32 light bulbs pop simultaneously as every power point in Huma police station fuses. Of course, everybody's freaking out, and Edward, the guy who's confessing everything, says, "Hey, what happened to the lights?" And then the narration says, "For the first and last time, unemployed blue-collar worker Edward the Confessor denies everything." And then we see Officer Sendak say, "Oh shit." Then we turn the page and we cut back to Swamp Thing and Abby is having the trip of her life. We see her dancing around naked in this field of colors, and she's saying, "You said you were losing your grip on humanity, Alec, but that's not strictly true, is it? I mean, no matter what's happened since I left, I know there's still a little bit of Alec Holland deep inside with all of his silly human feelings. You spied on me once, didn't you? When I was making love to Dawn. Don't deny it. I saw your face on the bedpost." And then a butterfly flies by and distracts her, and she says, "Oh, wow. Don't you think that butterfly looked totally amazing? Did you see that, Alec?" And then she turns because Swamp Thing hasn't said anything for a while, and she sees that Swamp Thing does not look like her. She looks all happy and naked and surrounded by colors, and he looks like he's rotting. And she says, "Oh God, I think I'm losing it." And then Swamp Thing's body begins to fall apart, and then it looks like it's turning into water. And as she watches this, Abby says, "Alec, say something for God's sake. You look like you're falling apart. It doesn't matter if I shut my eyes or not. I'm so high I can see through my eyelids. I need you to talk me down. Alec, where did you go? What's happening?" Then we see the hand of the stone construct Swamp Thing reach out and squish the butterfly that she was following, and then stand up next to her, but she doesn't see the stone Swamp Thing yet, and she's still freaking out, and she's saying, "Don't leave me alone here, not like this." And then she notices the stone figure standing behind her, and as she turns and sees it, she says, "Alec?" Then we cut back to the police station, and the narration says, "Downstairs in the cellar, the police dogs are barking. their fine senses disturbed by something they don't understand. Then we cut to the outside and the narration continues. The sidewalk bursts open and erupts with life. Wild vegetation thrashing around as it scales the building, manipulated by something older than God. And we see that Broakin the Druid is the one who's causing all this plant life to grow and explode and crawl up the building, and the narration continues. Within moments, every door and window in the station is covered by branches and nettles. There is no way in or out of the building. Now the sacrifice can take place without interruption. Outside, the Wicker Man begins to take shape as the walls explode with life and color. The Druid has so many ideas, so many corrupt thoughts in his head. Soon he'll have the power to act them out. Then we cut to Officer Brett Harris, who's holding on to his wife inside of the police station, and the narration says, Brett holds his wife tight and closes his eyes as he asks her a question. He wants to know what they should call their beautiful baby son. The stage is set, the characters are in place, and the offering is about to begin. The High Priest Broakin the Druid needs just one thing to complete the ritual and assume the abilities of the Earth Elemental. He must set the Swamp Thing alight. And as we turn to the last page, we see that the building is not just covered with greenery, but also that the skeleton of Swamp Thing has been growing around it. So it seems that Broakin the Druid has called Swamp Thing away from where he was with Abby and forced him to grow and engulf this building with his body. And like the narration said, he is about to light Swamp Thing's body on fire to sacrifice everyone in the building. And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So we'll have to wait until next time to see what happens with this. But until then, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planescreensandcomicbooks, all one word, at gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.